Bill, my name's Corey. Nice
Corey.
to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, like Eric said, we're with Bull City Bulletin.
35.
I also run a website called DurhamAgainstFluoride.com, and you are former risk assessor for the
I
EPA.
did 27 years at EPA as a senior scientist in the risk assessment division.
Okay.
Toxics.
Could you kind of just summarize what you did there and how you kind of came into the whole fluoride subject?
Basically, my job was to do high-level, significant risk assessments. I did the first risk assessment under a particular section of the toxics law that required manufacturers to report when they found that something that they made caused cancer or birth defects. And the first time EPA received something like that, I got the job to do a risk assessment on that. This was the kind of thing. A number of other.
So not just fluoride,
like,
but
a
number of different things.
Yeah, but I would see, because of my background in industrial settings, I was responsible for all industrial chemical toxicology kinds of issues.
Right. Now, the first time I became aware of your activities, I saw you did some testifying before Congress in regards to fluoride. Could you kind of...
I'll go back before that,
okay,
to how this all happened. One of the other things I did when I first came to EPA was I joined the effort to organize the professionals into a union at EPA headquarters. One of the first things we did when we had, the reason we organized the union was primarily to ensure that the professionals could do their work with a minimum of political influence on what we were doing.
Right.
To do our work with scientific integrity.
Objectively.
Yes, right. And so that's why we organized.
How much opposition did you have doing the union?
How much
opposition?
Well, we won our representational election by 92% in favor, 8% not among the bargaining unit, among the professionals. And management did not encourage us to do this. For instance, we had to do all the signature collecting during lunch hours and before work.
It didn't make it very easy for you.
Yeah, it didn't make it very easy. The head of the personnel office had signed behind his desk and said, "Kill them all, let God sort them out."
Wow.
So that was the kind of
psychology that you're dealing with.
Yeah, that was the kind of psychology we were dealing with. But nevertheless, in spite of all that, we won our election, and
What year is this?
This was the election was 1984. In June of 84, we won our representation election. And right away, we got into it with them over some asbestos ban and phase down rules. The long and short of that whole story was EPA lied about the reason that they were not going to use the toxic law to regulate asbestos. And said that they had to let the Occupational Safety and Health Administration and the Consumer Product Safety Commission do that because of a certain section of TSCA, Toxic Substance Control Act.
Right.
And the branch chief who was responsible for the EPA rule writing that said we were going to do that came to my office as a union officer. So what's the union going to do about that lie that we just heard up in the administrator's office at this press conference? And I didn't know anything about what had gone on. He said, "Look, we went to OSHA and we went to CPSC and we talked to their general counsels, and we had an agreement that the only effective way to control asbestos risk was to use the authority that EPA had under TSCA, and OSHA couldn't do it, and neither could CPSC."
Right.
Well, with that, I drafted a letter from the bargaining unit to the administrator saying, we know that this turned out to be a pressure from the Office of Management and Budget, and this wasn't your initiative to do this kind of thing, but it makes a joke out of our work,
right.
And we don't think that's, we don't want to have that happen again. Well, that got into the media, and it got into the New York Times, and the people who are fighting fluoride issues saw, hey, there's this bunch inside of EPA that gives a darn about what they're doing.
Right.
So let's go down and talk to them. And so we got a visit from someone, or a request said, "You guys want to hear a seminar about fluoride from John Yamianis?" And science. I said, "Yeah, sure, why not?" And at that time, I, like most other Americans, thought, there's no problem with fluoride.
You hadn't thought much about it.
I hadn't thought about it at all. It's good for your teeth. Yeah, what's the big deal? So we went to hear John Yamianis talk, and the scales fell from our eyes because he was laying out the science behind this.
And of course, you guys get it. You get it on that level.
He had written a book called Fluoride, the Aging Factor.
Right.
And so this was really quite an eye-opening event. And almost simultaneously with that, EPA was in the process of...
What year is this?
This is 1985 now. EPA is in the process of issuing a drinking water regulation for fluoride, under the Safe Drinking Water Act. And the guy who was writing what would go into the Federal Register came to Bob Carton, who was the union president at that time, and he said, this is offensive to me because what we're saying is, in this technical support document for what we're writing, there was a science background for this regulation that was going to set 4 ppm as the health-based goal, the safe level. We know that a large fraction of kids are going to have teeth that look like they've been chewing on shoe polish and rocks, and the severe dental fluorosis. And this is not right. Right. So with that, Carton and I went up to talk to the director of the Office of Drinking Water, and we invoked this seminar that we heard from Yamianis and this concern of this bargaining. He said, "Look, we just heard this seminar from John Yamianis about adverse effects of fluoride that have not been addressed in this technical support document. We'd like to have the people who was a contractor. It was not EPA scientists who wrote this technical support document. It was contracted out to some contractor firm, some of the Beltway bandits.
Third party.
Yeah, as we call them, the Beltway bandits. But the director, Whittington, said, "Oh no, we're not going to do that. We followed all the necessary procedures. We published in the Federal Register this assessment, the technical support document. There was comment and response periods."
How can someone find that document?
That's closed. Go back to look of fluoride drinking water standards and search the Federal Register for 1985.
And this is what they've based the
4 ppm on.
Right.
They looked at various kinds of endpoints and decided that the only one that applied was that they forgot all about mutagenicity studies. They thought they didn't consider any. There's been cancer studies that were done before that. Right. They didn't consider any of that, or they poo-pooed it. They just say, "Oh no, these studies are no good," and so forth and so on. And but this severe dental fluorosis, the severe skeletal fluorosis, we can regulate on that. And the severe dental fluorosis. I think I still have a copy of this memorandum from a science advisor that says, look, we can either call it a severe health effect or a cosmetic effect.
Aesthetic.
And so,
that's what they've stuck to.
So the call is yours, Mr. Administrator, how you want to do this. And we chose to be good federal soldiers and support the Department of Health and Human Services in their fluoridation program and say, well, let's go with the severe skeletal fluorosis, and we'll call that dental fluorosis a cosmetic effect, and let's get on with it.
Which they're still doing.
Yeah. So anyway, once that happened, there was a lawsuit against EPA for this very fact that they had proposed this 4 milligram per liter health-based goal, and the Natural Resources Defense Council sued EPA over that. They came to us now knowing that there's this gang inside of EPA that cares about doing the right thing, and they said, well, you guys write an amicus curiae brief in this lawsuit. We'll handle the legal end of it, you guys handle the science end of it. And I said, you bet we will. So Bob Carton sat down with Nora Choro from NRDC, and they drafted this amicus brief. and it eventually went to the federal district court in D.C. And the three-judge panel said, no, we're not going to accept this brief because it would be like EPA suing itself.
Because you're within the EPA.
You're employees of the union. You're employees of the agency. We argued that while we had a separate legal standing from the agency, we could take action against the agency as a union.
This goes back to like whistleblowing in general.
Well, that's right. This was whistleblowing.
You guys were
on a big
whistleblowers.
scale. We were an organized whistleblower. Here's what it amounted to. So.
You weren't just one person either. It
No,
was you
no.
had a consensus among.
That's right. The union voted to do this. We didn't individually
Right.
say, "Oh yeah, we'll file an amicus brief." We had to vote on that stuff, and so that's how that happened. And once we realized we were kind of in a box about what to do about this stuff, but we could clearly see that there were public health effects going on here that weren't being addressed.
Right.
And people started coming to us, having learned about our activities, and would you come up and talk to us up here in Wisconsin or in Illinois or Massachusetts and help us with this? We had to tread very carefully about how we handled that. Carton did all this stuff pretty much by himself in the early days, and he had to take leave, personal leave, to do that. And we checked with the general counsel of our union about accepting travel expenses and all that. And he said, that should be okay. That's covered under First Amendment. So we were very careful about that. We didn't accept any gratis for that.
Right.
That would have been a problem. So that's how we got involved with outreach.
Yeah.
When Bob left to join the U.S. Army Medical Research Command up in Fort Detrick as their environmental officer, and then it devolved on me to take over the fluoride fight as the leader. And so
That's what
starting
you've done.
in 1992.
Yeah, that's kind of why I wanted to talk to you, because you have such a unique perspective. We're citizens kind of on the outside looking in, and it's very easy for a lot of us to kind of blame the powers that be, for this issue. But you have kind of like an inside view of the bureaucracy. Can you talk about just your opinion and your personal experience, what's kind of driving this motivation to kind of obfuscate or railroad people like within your group within the EPA?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of forces at play here. One is that EPA is not a non-cabinet federal agency, and the political reality is we kind of are the small fry in the federal structure, and DHHS is the big guy. They're
progenitors of it.
They're the cabinet level agency, and this is their program, the Public Health Services program.
Right.
And so basically, we have to be the good federal soldier, and to go against that, the administrator of the EPA is the one who has the call on what EPA does. And
so
it's the political pressure on the very highest echelons of the agency is pretty severe to keep towing the line.
We have a hierarchical structure.
That's right.
Where the lower groups, as well intentioned as they may be, they can, no matter how much consensus you have someone else above you who's controlled, and they're able to.
And that not only plays out in the fluoride area, but it plays out
everywhere.
In pesticides and in other places. That's why whistleblowers blow the whistle.
Yeah.
Because this kind of thing, with the higher echelons say, I want X, Y, and Z of some staff person, there are two kinds of staff people. One will say, I don't want to be in this job like forever. I want to be a branch chief, and then I want to be a division director, and then I want to be an office director. And so
compromise.
So I challenge what the boss wants. Are you kidding?
Yeah.
Are you kidding? What color do you want it, boss, and how high do you want it stacked? That's the kind. That goes on, and people who don't play that game get shunted off to the side. Like Bob Carton, a brilliant scientist. He got stuck at GS-13. And
you stay where you're at
he
forever.
stayed where he was until the Army came along with a good offer.
So
where
it's kind of like being paid off, but not directly. It's kind of like an indirect payoff where you don't advance
absolutely,
if you
absolutely,
don't toe the
absolutely.
line. Yeah.
Now my advantage was I came in as a GS-15, which is pretty much as high as you can go without going into
What is it?
management.
Could you explain to people who don't understand what is a GS-15?
The general schedule is the pay schedule for federal employees. It starts out at GS-1 and goes up to GS-15. There are special cases of GS-17, 16, 17 for very specialized science type things, but within EPA, GS-15 is as high as you go. I didn't realize the significance of that when I came in as a GS-15 because of my prior work at Monsanto on another class of chemicals that was very high on the regulatory agenda.
I didn't know that.
Called phthalate ester. You know, a lot of people don't know that. But at one time I was the world's expert on phthalate esters, and I had created an environmental management plan to encompass the activities of all the companies that manufactured or processed or distributed phthalates to deal with why are phthalates ubiquitous in the environment, what are the health effects, what are the environmental effects, who's going to pay for it, what are we going to do with the first tier of results if we get X, and what do we do with it if the results
Now
are
you
Y.
were working for Monsanto?
I was working for
on that?
Monsanto and coordinating with the Chemical Manufacturers Association. And this comprehensive plan that I developed, I sold to the corporate vice presidents, Monsanto, Exxon Chemical, BASF, Tenneco, Eastman Chemical, and so forth. And they all bought into it. And I wrote a 60-page risk assessment on di-2-ethyl phthalate, which was the largest volume of phthalate at the time. It was also used in hemodialysis tubing, food contact applications, and it had just been learned that it caused cancer in both sexes of rats and mice.
Wow.
So then they named me the head of the Human Health Research Subcommittee of this phthalate panel to develop the $6 million research program. Blah, 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 all that stuff. And anyway, I ended up getting arrested at a nuclear power plant site doing civil disobedience and being involved in nuclear waste issues around the St. Louis area. And somebody got nervous about that.
At Monsanto,
Well, Monsanto, chemical manufacturers, somewhere somebody got nervous, and suddenly I was no longer in the management, environmental management. My boss said effective immediately, you're transferred back to research. Boink, back at the bench. And I said, I ain't going to do this for the rest of my life. So I got in touch with EPA, and long story short, I eventually ended up at EPA with this high-level GS.
Now, being at that level with Monsanto,
I didn't have to worry about a promotion. That was my.
So you could be objective, right?
Yeah, that's right. I could just do what I wanted to do because I knew I was not going to go anywhere in terms of promotion.
Right. Now you look at companies like Monsanto and a lot of the higher ups, they do eventually get into positions of government. With an FDA.
Yeah, we had
an
an
EPA,
assistant administrator.
You're an example of that in a way, but obviously a positive one. Of course, it doesn't always work out so positive.
Yeah, I could tell you the rest of that story. When I got canned from the environmental management program, I was in that environmental management program. I got into that. A letter had been written to the head of the Monsanto Industrial Chemicals Company, which was the place where my business group, the plasticizer business group, was, from the corporate vice president for environmental affairs at Monsanto, a guy named Monty Throdall. He said, we're going to experience problems with phthalate esters based on the Toxic Substance Control Act, which had just been passed, and the Clean Water Act, which had regulated water discharges of phthalate esters. And for a couple of reasons. Phthalate esters were in the first list of 10 chemicals to be subject to testing requirements under TSCA. The Clean Water Act, there had been a consent decree that said the EPA was going to set regulations on this list of toxic chemicals. Phthalate esters was on that list, and di-2-ethyl hexylphthalate was a prominent one. And so Throdahl said, we're going to experience blowback on this stuff. We need to have a corporate environmental strategy, how to deal with that. We need to find out what we know about our
Like get ahead of the curve.
That's exactly right. We need to get ahead of the curve. We need to know what we know now.
Save their butts.
What we need to know in the future. Absolutely. And also to do the right thing.
Sure.
To do the right thing. So I, at that time, had been moved over from one research element to another. I'd been a bench chemist developing plasticizer, and then Monsanto de-emphasized new products, and I was over in some applications laboratory looking for replacements for asbestos and fluoride.
Right. Yeah.
So I got a call from my second level boss, who was my second level boss almost the whole time I was in Monsanto. He said, "Hey Bill, coming out and talk to you. How would you like to be part of this environmental management team?" He showed me this letter from anti-fluoride. I said, "You bet I do." So it was my job to do essentially environmental risk assessment on 2 very high volume phthalate esters. We didn't make DEHP anymore, the one that caused cancer. But we were the world's largest producer of phthalates of all kinds. And so my job was to do environmental and regulatory risk assessments on all these products. How much jeopardy are we in from these laws? What does our science say about the toxicity? How vulnerable are we in terms of toxic effects? And so I got involved in it.
What was your conclusions?
Well, I'll tell you that in just a second, but another part of Throdahl's letter said, I envision a daring and a bold approach to doing this kind of thing that might, for instance, involve establishing relations with environmental